how and why I use a Garmin as well as a Galaxy Watch. So, this is the 6S Pro, this is the Galaxy Watch 4. In the beginning I tracked only with the Galaxy Watch 4 and the Galaxy Active 2 before. Eventually I got a little bit of frustrated, you could say, because Samsung Health didn't really innovate. In the beginning, for example, there was a weight tool that allowed me to input my calories on the one hand and on the other hand to see how much calories I burned in a given day. Yet, this tool is gone and has been gone for years now. Garmin still offers something like this in combination with FitnessPal, so on this side, Garmin wins. Now, there are also a few other sides, mostly the one being that this is an AMOLED screen, whereas this is an MIP screen. So the difference between those two different screens is that the AMOLED screen needs to light up in order to actually show something, whereas the other one is already lit up. You cannot see it properly now, but if I hold it into the light, you can see it. Why? Because it is a reflective display, which means that it reflects the light. It also has a backlight, but of course you don't need the backlight in normal situations. Therefore, this has a, in theory, way better battery life. The only downside to this exact watch is that it is refurbished and therefore the battery only lasts for about 2 days if I have all sensors turned on and I use it for tracking about an hour of activity in a given day on average. There are a few upsides to having a Galaxy Watch, like the integration with the ecosystem that Samsung actually provides you with. So you have maybe a Galaxy phone, and if you have also a Galaxy Watch, you could, for example, start and stop your camera, you can take photos and so on and so forth. What is also available or has been available with the Galaxy Watches, the newer generations, is that you have basically Wear OS on your watch. It's a combination between the two previous systems, so there was one made by Samsung and there was one made by Google. The one by Google was called Wear OS, whereas the other one was called Tizen, and they kind of merged together, so now you have basically Google and Samsung on both one watch. It also offers a lot of other functionalities such as ECG or EKG, depending on how you spell it, and this allows you basically to track your heart electrocardiogram. So this is what it stands for, electrocardiogram, and this is kind of a metric that allows you to measure a few things about your heart. Probably you won't have the knowledge to actually interpret this properly, but at least you can input it into a software such as Samsung Health Monitor. This is the software and the app that is available in the Galaxy Store, not really in the normal Play Store, I think only in the Galaxy Store, and then you can see, okay, this is okay or this is not okay. Also unique to the Galaxy Watch compared to the Garmin is the ability to measure blood pressure, which is also quite nice, but you have to calibrate it about every 4 weeks, and since I do not have a blood pressure monitor yet, I calibrated it before, and now it just doesn't work anymore because it needs to be calibrated again. How accurate this is, I don't exactly know, but of course it's not that accurate. It's not as accurate as medical devices, but nonetheless, if you have a trend and at least the error is kind of similar, at least similar in a way where basically if this would be the ideal value that has to be measured, and then the device measures either below or above. Now there can be two things that occur. Either it measures below or above like this. If the range of error is within a certain range, then over time you can still use the data in order to extrapolate trends, for example. So if you have a data point here, 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 then you have these different ranges here, 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 and therefore you can still interpolate this trend. Of course, this trend could be this trend or this trend, but it doesn't really matter that much because, I mean, it's better than no data at all. An easy example would be the following. I had no idea how many steps I actually would step whenever I ran. So I began at age 12 or 11 with running, and I ran about 3 kilometers or 5 kilometers. I just didn't know because there was no GPS around, and also phones weren't around yet to actually track the whole thing. So for this reason I wore a step counter on my hip belt, not on my belt but just on my shorts, and well, it was kind of inaccurate, I guess, but it also incentivized me to just record steps and steps and steps again. And since someone else in my family also had a tracker, it was like, oh yeah, I have this many steps, I have this many steps. And this is kind of a gamification of the whole health thing that otherwise is quite complex. But then, after I had the Galaxy Watch, I had also the Galaxy Fit 1 before, and then I switched to the Galaxy Watch, and still, I mean, it is nice, it is also usable, but it was really slow. And this is one of the main downsides of having this combination system, maybe, that it has to apply to many different watches, therefore you cannot optimize it for a single given hardware, therefore this is really slow. If you think of a phone like from 5 or 10 years ago, then this is usually what this feels like. I mean, I can turn it on, and if I swipe through the different screens, then it works. But if, for example, I just wanted to track workouts, so let's say I am outside and I want to begin to run, and since I do try to do cold exposure, for example, in the morning, running for 10 minutes, outside it's 0 degrees Celsius, and I run in a tank top and shorts. So for this reason, I don't want to unnecessarily stand like 30 seconds there just to wait for my watch. So let's try this, and I don't know how this experiment will turn out. If we click on workout here, so there is a widget that actually can be displayed on the watch interface itself, on the watch face itself, and if you click it, the workout starts. So now I have to input my code, which I will do, and then this is one of the first things. If you have Google or Samsung Pay, then you have to enter the code. And every time you need to access the watch, you have to enter the code. Of course, you can set up things like if it is connected via Bluetooth to my phone, then this might be a reason for this not to lock. But this actually, I think, doesn't work this way. It just works the other way around. So if your phone is connected to the Galaxy Watch, then it might not unlock, but it doesn't really work the other way around. At least I haven't found a feature that allows me to do this. Because as of this, every time I go outside, then I have to unlock the watch, and I might type the wrong thing because I have the smaller version, which is the 40mm version of the Galaxy Watch 4. So now if we now click on here, what might appear is nothing. It just nothing happens. You don't know if you clicked, you don't know if you didn't click, and now the thing appears again. And this is essentially what you are not doing all day, but this is kind of the frustration. Okay, let's try this again. Let's say I'm outside, I'm freezing already, I want to start the run. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. What is this? So now in comparison, the Garmin watch. And this is one of the best things about the Garmin watch. If I am outside and I want to go running, then I click here, button, and this doesn't have a touch. The newer FENIX series, the 7, actually do have touch displays. This one doesn't. So I have to use these buttons. There are 5 in total, 3 on this side and 2 on the other side. So now I have these pre-selected workouts, and I can just skip through them using these 2 buttons. So I can just go like this. And I can click faster if I want to, and there is no 5-second latency to my clicks. I do know if I press the button, and it also works. I haven't pressed a button yet that didn't work. Of course, over time, maybe one of these buttons won't work, and this could be an upside to having a watch with only 2 buttons. Of course, this also has 2 buttons now. Of course, you can also use these buttons, but 5 buttons are way better in order to basically function in everyday life, especially when tracking this. So of course now, I could also set this up with Garmin Pay, and I would need my phone for it. And this is already one of the major upsides of this one here. This one has LTE functionality, and I especially bought this because of the LTE functionality. Yesterday, for example, I forgot my phone. I went to the gym and afterwards to the library. But with this here with me, I knew that I had a power bank in my backpack. I also had a secondary charger with which I could charge this watch. So now, in case of any emergency, I have this on my wrist. And even though in case of emergency, it is probably empty, and currently I'm charging it for about 2 hours in a given day. So once in the morning, once at nighttime. And often if I sleep, it just goes out of battery, and then the sleep is not tracked, which is not really ideal because then all the data is kind of missing. And that's if you have a certain data set and you want to see what this data set actually looks over time, and you want to interpret the data, then if you go like this, and this is just bad. So for this reason, mostly for the battery life, I wanted to search for a different solution. I searched for different solutions, such as the Whoop Band, for example, that would offer different metrics, like strain, like recovery. But what I have found, and also one of the major downsides of having this here, is that you have to use your phone all the time. You can access Samsung Health on this watch here, but what you cannot really do is access Samsung Health on the web. You can access it on your phone, and that's the main hub for accessing it, because here you can just see a few things. But on Garmin, if you think about Strava, if you have used Strava before, Strava is a service that lets you basically publish your activities to your friends, and your friends can see how fast you ran, what your heart rate is, and so on and so forth. You might want to do this, you might not want to do this, depending on how you want to incentivize yourself to work out more or less, or more or less. So Strava is actually quite similar to what Garmin looks on the web. And the main problem with Strava is it only takes activities into account, but it doesn't take your sleep into account, your steps, your weight, your body fat, and your blood pressure, your oxygen levels at night. And so for all of these reasons, I just found that this here is kind of one of the best tools you probably can get, at least I could get and I discovered until now. So what even is possible with this watch natively is to track your gym lifts. I haven't done this with this watch and I haven't tried it properly, but you can create workouts. I just haven't found, so I in the last months basically searched for a solution to track my lifts, and now I know that I lift about 5 to 6 tons in a given workout that lasts about 30 minutes that I do 3 times a week. So this is quite useful because then I can see how the load decreases or increases or decreases over time. So I can actually progressive overload, because before I just didn't know how much load I actually had on all of the different exercises combined, but now I do. It just shows it to me. It also shows to me, so the app is called Strong. That's not Garmin. The app is called Strong and it shows to me whenever I hit a PR in either a certain exercise, or I hit a 1 rep max, or I hit a prognosed or predicted 1 rep max, and then over time I can see if I'm trending upwards or downwards. But with no data you cannot really see that. If you just track the workout and the heart rate, then it's just basically a big box. What also Garmin allows you to do, not specifically on this watch, I at least haven't found it yet, is if I, for example, I do run to the gym in order to warm up, and also because it's only a few hundred meters, therefore I often run, or I go via bike if I go somewhere else. So what this watch now allows you to do is to combine these 3 different activities. In Samsung I would have tracked it like this: the run here, and then we have the run, which is 0.8 kilometers, then the main workout, which is about 30 minutes, and then I would drive again somewhere else or run back. So all of these combined are basically my evening workout, but of course these are not really individual workouts because they are combined, and these are my evening workouts. For this reason it would be nice if they would be combined but yet individual, and this is what Garmin allows you to do with multisport. I haven't found that I can, so what I have not found on the 6S at least, because the 6S has not the newest software compared to the 7S and so on and so forth. So what I have not found is that I can individualize the different workouts. So there only seem to be presets, at least in this watch, the 6S Pro, and I cannot individualize, so I cannot randomly combine 2 different workouts. You can also manually create new workouts, which is something that is, I think, not possible on the Galaxy Watch. I'm not speaking of workouts, I'm actually speaking of activities you want to track. So you could, for example, say that you want to track dishwashing because it's super intensive and you want to track it. On Garmin you could do this and it would track basically also your GPS, I think, usually. I don't know if you can turn it off, I haven't discovered this yet. But on the Galaxy Watch you are kind of out of luck. What seems to be a little bit better on the Galaxy Watch is that if you just randomly walk outside, and for the last years I haven't tracked my walks, because the thing is, where do I make the distinction? If I just walk outside, if I just walk down to the laundry machines, do I track this? When do I track this? The heuristic I usually used was if something lasts about 10 minutes, then I would track it. But I didn't track any walking. Why? Because otherwise I would just be tracking all day. So what I did usually is whenever I do bike ride, that's usually, I mean, more probably than 500 meters or 1 kilometer. So what I usually do is I track a bike ride. When I then stop, there are different functionalities. Both can auto stop and auto start again. So if I, for example, get a package from somewhere, then I start the watch when I leave. And then if I'm at the store here, it stops the workout, and then afterwards it basically continues the workout, and it's all one activity, which is nice. To what I've seen is you can activate both on these watches. So you can activate the auto tracking. You also can have Google Fit on there. So if you don't want to have Samsung Health recording all of your activities and instead want to use Google Fit, then you can also use it. There is also a service called Health Connect, which allows you to synchronize now Google Fit and Samsung, which I use. So now, in order to set this whole ecosystem up, previously I used this one. Now I'm switching to Garmin. The main problem is that you cannot really connect these 2 services. You can only use Garmin as a source and then import all the activities into Samsung Health. But you cannot import steps, for example. So what I have been using over the last weeks and what I discovered so far is the following system. First of all, there's an app called Health Sync. And this app allows you to sync between different health services, also like Polar, like Strava, like Samsung Health, like Google, and so on and so forth. Without this app, I wouldn't really know what to do. So this is the first one. It's called Health Sync. Now there is another app called, there are a few other apps actually, but I did not really try them. And there is also the problem that if you give somebody access to your location data, aka your activities, then well, you just might get doxxed, you might have privacy problems, you might have someone show up at your door, and someone you didn't want to show up at your door. So these are all obviously concerns, valuable concerns. In my specific case, I decided that, or the conclusion that I was left with was that it probably made more sense to track things than not to track things and to use services like these, because otherwise I would not be able to synchronize these two services together. Because I still have a lot of data in here in Samsung Health. I also cannot transfer ECG data to Garmin Connect, for example. Garmin Connect is the actual name of the platform. It's not just called Garmin, but Garmin Connect. And what I also cannot track is blood pressure, even though I think Garmin does allow for blood pressure tracking. Now, Garmin also just innovated in basically followed up to Apple Health and also to Galaxy watches, because they, on the Venue, so one of the more smartwatchy models of Garmin, on the Venue 2S, I think, they just introduced at least ECG measurements. Because they have similar sensors, I think this is in general the Generation 4 sensor on Garmin. This could also mean that it comes also to the other watches. Maybe it doesn't, maybe, who knows. The 6S Pro has the older sensor, this is the Generation 3 sensor. Back to the synchronization. So now what I used in the past is I used HealthSync in order to synchronize Samsung Health with Google Fit, because some apps, some fitness apps like fasting trackers, for example, only synchronize with Google Fit but not with Samsung Health. Google Fit seems to just have more integrations. For this reason, I used in the past this service to sync to G-Fit. Now, I don't need to do this anymore, because now Health Connect does this. Even though it is still in beta, I set it up and it seems to kind of work. I also didn't pay that much attention. In the beginning, it synchronized a lot of double activities and I deleted a few, and I actually don't know if my whole data system, not my whole data system, but my whole activity track record of about 6,000 manually tracked activities is now polluted, but well. So now I don't need this anymore. I just connected Google Fit as well as Samsung Health, both to Health Connect, and ideally this would synchronize across these platforms. Now, in terms of connecting Garmin and Samsung Health, or so now here, we have these 4 different entities here. So now, these 4 different entities, these 2 are apps and these 2 are the services. Garco is Garmin Connect, S-Health is Samsung Health. So now, what you can do is the following. With Health Sync, you can sync from Garmin to Samsung Health, but you cannot sync from Samsung Health to Garmin Connect. I think you cannot sync anything to Garmin Connect. What you cannot do is you cannot sync your steps from Garmin Connect to Samsung Health in any way. I didn't find any way that is possible. This seems to be on the Samsung side, so Samsung just doesn't allow step writing anymore. Which means if I want to have my steps, I still need to wear this watch. I do still wear this watch anyway, because of the emergency phone function, mostly. And also I still have this watch set up as an NFC payment solution that works independently of my phone, whereas this doesn't have LTE, and therefore I don't have the option to pay independently, and also cannot call people on this watch. There is one watch from Garmin, the Garmin Forerunner 945, which has LTE, but the newer watches don't. So the Garmin Forerunner 945 actually is from 2019, as well as the 6S, the FENIX 6S, and the newer watches, the Garmin FENIX series, 7 series, doesn't have LTE. Maybe it will come in the future, who knows. So now, in the beginning, I didn't really know whether I should now track activities with this, but I couldn't really sync them with Samsung and Garmin. So if I track activities with Samsung Health, I cannot really import them here. There comes the other app into play. So what I could do is I could activate developer mode, and this app is called Sync My Tracks, and it allows you with developer mode and so on and so forth. It is a little bit of a setup, and it also doesn't work super well. But what also doesn't work super well is manually exporting all the activities, which I also tried, and then importing them via web into Garmin Connect. I tried this, didn't work. Maybe I was just not figuring it out properly, but in my experience it didn't work. Because there is a common activity standard, often GPX files, for example, when it comes to tracks, you can synchronize manually somehow the activities and maybe import them also into Excel or any other data program. Now, with this new app, I could synchronize, and this is not as well made it's more in the beta phase compared to health sync, which is properly functioning, working. I didn't have really issues with health sync anymore. So what you can do is, or what I did in the last few months, I set up basically Samsung Health with health sync, and this synced at least my activities and seemingly also either my steps or also my weight. I'm not entirely sure about this. But this now means, at least on a different tier, I have all the Samsung Health activities, at least not the other data points, such as heart rate and so on and so forth, in Garmin Connect. There is an argument to be made that maybe you don't want Garmin Connect to interpret the data recorded, the heart rate data, for example, recorded on other devices, such as the Galaxy Fit or also the Samsung Watch, because it probably interprets it somewhat wrongly compared to Samsung Health, who knows maybe what their flaws are, who knows what the measurement tolerances are, and therefore maybe the data interpretation on native services and native watches is better. So this now means I have about the historic 6,000 activities stored on Google Fit as well as Samsung Health, and now I could also at least export the activities, import the activities again to Garmin Connect. Now I switched, and the switch worked as following. I basically disabled the switch to, so with Health Connect, the one that synchronizes G-Fit and Samsung Health already, I already connected this via Health Connect, the common app from Garmin, not from Garmin, but from Google and from Samsung. Then I now at least have the historic records of Samsung Health and therefore also of Google Fit in Garmin Connect. All the other data is not in Garmin Connect, only the activities. Then I now switched. I basically deactivated this workflow, and I now actually don't need this app anymore. And this was the only app that allowed you to write from another app to Garmin. And what I now have set up is Health Sync again, that just uses the activities exported from Garmin and imports them to Samsung Health. And that happens flawlessly, automatically. The data interpretation on the Samsung Health side also seems to be normal. There are a few features, like you can actually measure how stiff you are when you are running, or the cadence, for example. And some of these features obviously will not be available if you transfer or if you record the activity on another device from another service. But I don't really care that much about this because Garmin seems to be a little bit better. Of course, there are a few downsides and upsides to both of these services, and therefore I now have the special opportunity to kind of use both. I can use ECG and heart rate tracking still on here. I actually deactivated the automatic tracking also on here, so if I go outside, and this, by the way, is also an upside of maybe the Galaxy Watch system, the Samsung Health system. So if I walk outside for, let's say, 15 minutes, then it tells me after 10 minutes, oh, you have walked for 10 minutes. Do you either want to continue to manually track this? So do you either want to now start also tracking GPS data? Basically, it realizes that you walked for 5 minutes. Then it asks you if you basically want to create a manual activity that already has the 5 minutes, but no GPS data on the 5 minutes, but from the point at which, or from the point of which on you begin to record also GPS data, then you have GPS data. This means you have like one walking activity that could last for, let's say, 15 minutes. The first 5 minutes doesn't have GPS data, but then it has. So it might give you an estimate based on your cadence and so on and so forth, and your step count, but that's kind of a unique feature on this year, that it allows you to automatically track a few activities. Also, when I worked basically a little bit outside, maybe in the woods, for example, what I often noticed is that this, when I was very active, and also if I washed the dishes very, very quick, it noticed that my pulse rate was slightly higher, and also when cleaning up, for example, or when moving, it notices these things and automatically records activities. Now, Garmin also automatically records activities, but whereas Samsung doesn't make that much differentiation between these two activities, so you can differentiate in the Samsung Health app between manually recorded activities and automatically recorded activities. You can, I think, exclude them in some views. So let's say you want to see your walks and then you manually and you automatically recorded walks, then I think this works. With Garmin, it does it a little bit differently. It says, okay, whenever you do a workout, you actually do work out. You are kind of more on the side of, oh yeah, I now work out intensively, and doesn't treat them as equally. It still has symbols. So if, for example, this is your step count, or this is just a daily view, and then what you have is maybe here it shows you that it shows you basically a symbol where you were walking. And this is not a manual activity, this is just auto-recorded activity. It's based on your step count and your heart rate and so on and so forth, but it doesn't appear in your manually tracked activities. This distinction could make sense for you, it could also not make sense for you. Depends on what you want to do with these activities, depends on your activity level, depends on actually what you want to do and track with these two watches, or these two different services. For the time being, I am wearing both of these watches. Why? First of all, I like the symmetry of it. Of course, this is a little bit heavier because it is also a little bit thicker. So this is about 40-45 grams in total, also with the band, I think. And this one is about 60 grams. So there are also versions that are made specifically for runners. These are called For Runner. You might have guessed it, that's a series that is for runner and for runners, and that doesn't have as much metal. So you can see that here on the side, this is plastic, then the bottom plate is metal, and also you have here glass and also a metal ring on the outside. The newer watch, I think, is even also metal on the side, the FENIX 7, but what this means also that this is slightly heavier. It's a third heavier about this. So if you think about running and you really think about running symmetry and you run maybe a marathon, then you probably have some posture adjustments based on maybe 20 grams more on your wrist. It's not that the 20 grams itself is so much. It is just on a lever that is like 30-35 centimeters and then on another lever. And this lever now swings like this and maybe is almost half or I don't know how long my arm actually is, probably almost a meter. So my arm from the finger until where it inserts into my body is about 70 centimeters. And therefore my wingspan is about 92 multiplied by 2, which is about 184 centimeters. So if you're flipping around any weight on that much of a lever, of course only on one side, then you might have potential adaptations that occur in your body. I like the symmetry. I also can kind of enlarge this watch with something I have that is a cover. So this is slightly bigger. Without the cover, this is slightly smaller. With the cover, so this is 40 millimeters in diameter, this is 41 millimeters in diameter. With the cover, this now is slightly bigger. It depends on what look you want to go for. Another thing to watch out for is when you are wearing these watches all the time. Of course, if you sleep on your stomach, you constantly are sleeping on these watches. If you have your hands, for example, under your body somewhere, or you have it like this, but then often the arm begins to sleep, at least in my experience. So the thing I wanted to also tell you is that if you have like a shirt, a normal shirt, and then you want to have the watch not visible, then this might also be something you have to look out for. The thicker the watch, the more or the less you actually can do this without noticing the watch constantly. I probably at some point in the future will upgrade to the 7S. One of the main things that drew me to this watch was that it cost about half of it. So this cost me 319 euros refurbished, but also the battery is not that good. It could last about a week, at least according to the battery estimates, but it only lasts for about 2 days. So for this reason I could get it replaced. I could get the battery maybe replaced on my own terms, paying with my own money, or I don't. What is unique to the 7 is it has a feature called stamina that tells you while you are running, while you are biking, for example, how much is left in the tank. Here you only have body battery, and you also have training readiness, which also has a feature that is called acute load, which I think you can also display in one of the glances that are available whenever you do a workout, so you can switch through them just with the click of a button. Something else to notice is also that if you have gloves on, you don't need to take off your gloves just to get to the touchscreen. And what was also a problem in the past with me wearing gloves and then biking and then maybe on the bike trying to navigate is that I searched specifically for gloves that would be touch enabled. But mostly the gloves that are touch enabled or work with touch screens are on the thinner side, let's just say. And often I just didn't find something that was quite usable, that also didn't feel like I had to just two pranks on my hands, bear pranks basically. So I just had realized it is a false friend. The hands of bears are called paws, not pranks. In German they're called Pranke. And finally, another feature that is very cool on the Garmin is the following. I can, because the display is visible at all times, I can display something on the display without causing constantly battery drain. So what I have on here is basically different health stats. Ideally, these optimize for longevity. I also have written something on this topic already. What would be the ideal health stats you either can track already or that would be ideal to track and to therefore incentivize you and to nudge you. So you create a system in which you nudge yourself into, for example, trying to lower your resting heart rate, which is at the bottom here, which my resting heart rate is currently 49. It is maybe not ideal, so there are people apparently who now have a resting heart rate of about 27, which is the world record. The proven world record is either also 27 or maybe slightly higher or lower. I think so there was an athlete who posted this, I think, to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, who had like 27, and the world record is, I think, 29, if I remember correctly. Also on this watch, in the bottom here, what we have is a move bar. No, this is actually the steps. So I have set it to 10,000 steps, and this means the green shows basically how close I am to the 10,000 steps. The next thing that is very interesting is that there are watch faces available that also show you the different seconds, which is nice because then you can actually use it in order to estimate time. And I want the seconds on it because I need the seconds, because I often time, for example, my workouts for 30 seconds. Basically Tabata, but I also time my workouts at the gym for 5 minutes, for example, and then 2 exercises with a superset, and therefore I just need to know also the seconds. And not just guess when the next minute will probably hit the clock. What I also have here is my current heart rate. What I also have on here is the calories I've burned on activity on a given day. Up here is, so this is another bar that just turns red whenever I don't move for a long time, and it's just now a color. On the Galaxy Watch you also have a similar feature that actually also alerts you, but I think there is, maybe there is a watch face with something similar to this. What I also have down here is the floors I have climbed in a given day, down here, and down here the heart rate again. So ideally you would also have metrics like VO2 max, because they also seem to indicate longevity or predict longevity in some fashion. Maybe also your heart rate, maybe the 7-day average, for example. This 49 resting heart rate is also the 7-day average, because then it's not entirely based on one single day. That could be kind of skewed. The metric could be skewed, the measurement could be skewed because you didn't sleep that well, for example, and therefore your resting heart rate is a little bit higher than usual. Therefore, ideally you have the average of some period in the past. Maybe not the maximum heart rate of the last year, for example, because how well you're able to achieve your predicted maximum heart rate, 220 minus your age, is also kind of a predictor of how well functioning at least your heart currently still is. So if you want to test this for a given year, and then in the beginning of the year you hit your maximum heart rate, then you already did it already. So therefore, further incentives that would derive from you seeing your maximum heart rate on your watch daily whenever you take a look at the time are probably less likely. So instead, what you could do is take the maximum heart rate within a given month, within a given week, and then take the average, for example. So the average of the last 7 days would be something that maybe would be quite useful. Something else that would be interesting is also the net calories, not just the burned calories. So if you input your calories in MyFitnessPal, which integrates very tightly with Samsung Health as well as Garmin, but a little bit more integration, I would say, on the Garmin side, then what you have here is, and you can also have a widget on here on the Galaxy Watch, which also shows you the net calories. I think it shows you the net calories, but the problem here is you need to turn it on, and I haven't found a watch face yet, I think, that just shows you the net calories, and I also cannot have the watch face enabled on here because it just drains too much battery and I need to charge it like 2 times a day anyway. So what would be nice if you see here how much calories you can still eat in a given set of 24 hours, or also known as a day, and how much calories you may have overeaten. And then it might create a slight incentive to maybe do 10 more push-ups, or maybe take a walk 10 minutes instead of, let's just say, a very easy example is when you talk to friends on the phone or your family on the phone, then you can either just sit in place for 10 minutes or you can just take a walk outside for 10 minutes. For the sake of efficiency of your communication, it probably is not that likely that it influences or negatively influences it, but for the sake of you recording more steps and a little bit more activity, this is just a very simple step you could take, but you maybe wouldn't take. So it is just increasing the likelihood of doing such things, and therefore it, I think, is very nice that there are such watch faces available. And just in general, the Garmin Connect thing, the Garmin Connect app and the Garmin Connect service is just much more for fitness nerds, for sport nerds, for athletes, you could also say, compared to this, which is more targeted towards the average user that just wants to track a little bit of steps and maybe do occasional workouts. Of course, you can still use this in order to be a professional athlete. I am not, but this is just more on the professional side. If you run a marathon and this stops recording after 2 hours, I had an instance where I, for example, drove like 35 kilometers or 50 kilometers in total with the bike, and after hour 1 it just stopped. And maybe I didn't charge it completely before, but I just didn't have a rucksack on me because I just wanted to go out for a bike ride, and it ended up being a little bit longer because I still had gas in the tank, so to speak, and it just went out. So I had no music. I also had still 30 kilometers left to go, and I then also didn't have any kilometers tracked. And for the purpose of tracking all of your kilometers, when it comes to bike rides, for example, this makes sense, I think, to just track all of the kilometers that are tracked. And then you can look back at maybe 1 year and see how many kilometers you actually ran or cycled. But you cannot if there is missing data. And you can also not take a look at your sleep data if about 10%, about 20% is missing and therefore pollutes the whole dataset. For this reason, I'm quite... In conclusion, I think I will run this dual system. I will use this as my smartwatch and also maybe occasionally to pay. With this I could also pay, but only if it is connected to my phone. And instances where yesterday, where I just forgot my phone at home, are kind of now possible because this can track all the activities. This means also there is a less battery drain because I don't have to track activities on there. I also now have the battery saving feature constantly enabled, and if you put it in flight mode, the battery extends to maybe 10 to 20%. So with both watches, you have basically more battery in total.